Clap, 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 clap. Cool. Hello, everybody, and welcome to our continued dive into the AFI, the American Film Institute's Top 100 Films. And to Noah and I's delight, that includes one of our personal favorites, The Fellowship of the Ring. Which, does this hold the title for being the most recent film on the AFI Top 100?
I believe it does.
Yeah, so that's impressive. And I don't think many people who are coming from my audience, fantasy nerds, will disagree. So go ahead and kicking into this. I actually want to start, I'm sorry, by bringing up a point you made in our last episode, Rear Window. And I didn't notice at the time, but I want to push back on you on this. Is that okay?
Yeah, by all means.
All right, so you specifically made the point that...
There are a couple of directors who make it on the list a couple of times. And I think if you're going to do that, they have to be really outstanding pieces. Or maybe just limit it to one per director or something.
And I just want to say I disagree with your philosophy. I think it should be purely on the basis of how good the films are. And if one director made 100 perfect films, they would take the top 100 for me. And I just think your philosophy's flawed. That's all I'm saying.
No, I mean,
that's my entire spiel.
I think that's I'm glad that you said that. It's nice to have a little bit of pushback. I feel like that's what makes conversations interesting, is not just two people agreeing with each other back and forth. So I maybe am a little bit already apprehensive about this one because honestly, I don't really know how to do an unbiased take on Lord of the Rings. I'm going to do my absolute best, but yeah, I want you to have differing opinions than me, and I want to have differing opinions than you. Actually, Daniel, I have sort of been laboring over this all week because I've been thinking about this and I don't really know how to tackle it because, first of all, you and me, neither of us are biased on this film or this series. This is one of your...
Oh, we're not? You just said we're not biased?
We're not. This is one of your favorite books. I mean, this is one of the things that you talked about on your book channel for a long time.
Noah meant to say we are biased, and he just doubled down on saying we're not biased twice.
Oh.
So...
You're right.
Ben, play it back. Slow-mo. Boom.
You and me, neither of us are biased on this film or this series.
Sorry, continue.
We're incredibly biased on these movies. We've read the books, we've read expanded things about them,
and more importantly, they were so foundational when we were kids. This was what got in our heads and just...
And not to mention, we're only talking about the one movie today, and there's 3 movies. They're all 3 hours long, just the ones that were released in the theater, not even touching on the extended edition.
We're not talking extended. I have to all my notes are gone.
Scrap them.
So this is, I think we're in a dangerous territory where you and I could very easily spend this whole episode just talking about like, oh, we went and saw it in theaters. It was such an amazing experience, stuck with us forever, like core memory. Absolutely. So I want to keep us off that track as long as I can.
Okay.
This is my big question for you that I wanted to get into is, what are your harshest criticisms of Fellowship of the Ring? If you had to tear down this movie, and I want you to be nitpicky, because let's be honest, no one, I have to be nitpicky to have anything here. What are your nitpicks of Fellowship of the Ring?
Wow, Emily's gonna love this. She and I. Hold on. I want to do a brief segue because this is fantastic. I'm really glad you asked that question. Emily and I watched this movie last night. She has seen it before, and is notoriously skeptical, to say the least, about the films. Has called them Twilight for men, which arguably has some legitimacy to it.
The amount of angry... so when she said that in our recent video on my main channel, immediately people were like, oh, that's funny, ha ha ha. And then as like the algorithm sent it to people outside my audience, there were people who were like, that is offensive to say.
Well, that's what. Okay, so we're like watching this, and I'm like taking notes as I'm watching it, and they're all like pretty positive notes. And she was like, "Do you want to hear what I have to say?" And I said yes. And so she starts giving me her list of criticisms, and I thought, we have been together for so long. This is the woman I plan on marrying. I thought I was ready for it, and I
introduced them.
So petty. I was silent for the rest. I was upset. we had to like talk through it. I was like, I really thought I was ready to hear criticisms of this movie. I guess that it's too close to my heart. That being said, some time has passed. There are there are some actual criticisms that I would make of this movie. First of all, let's talk about the overuse of incredibly soft lighting. Is it appropriate sometimes to introduce the elves? Yeah, maybe. But I mean,
Yeah.
it's fantasy. I'm trying to not make excuses for it, but oh my God, it is like, and it's only gotten worse as the series has continued, as you get into The Hobbit and the Amazon series that's coming out. It's like everything is airbrushed and so soft. It's like you're in a cloud.
Especially, I don't know if you watched the 4K remaster. That's what I got into for my most recent watching, and it sticks out even more in 4K. Yeah, it's even harsher in 4K.
I don't know. Those are two of mine off the bat. Do you have any criticisms that you want to make of the film?
That I want to? No. That I have? Sure.
Yeah.
This is more of the franchise as a whole, but if you want to get into the trope of fake out death, there's only one real death in the party, and it's Boromir.
Yeah.
There's going to be fans who say, Gandalf did die.
Not really. He's just reincarnated. I mean, like, yeah. Frodo fake dies a couple times. Several people, quote unquote, die a few times throughout the series. I'm probably gonna get a lot of hate for this, but the acting in the movies is overall not that great.
What?
Hold on, and let me put a little asterisk on this. Let's just say for the quality of films that they are, which they are objectively a fantastic series, I feel that maybe we should get better acting across the board. So Ian McKellen, fantastic performance, like probably my favorite performance in the one. And Christopher Lee, who plays Saruman, again, I love it. It's just incredible. Aragorn is excellent. I feel that Elijah Wood does a lot. Because, and this is probably as close to Twilight as Lord of the Rings maybe ever gets, is that Frodo's character, for the rest of the series, basically is just expressions and is just kind of, the rest of it is just sort of the camera looking at him and him doing various, like, emoting with his face, which is great. That takes talent, but
I will agree. And somehow the way he talks, he makes it so that every word is kind of this drawn out syllable. Oh, Sam. But I'm like, enunciate.
Glad you're
here. That I will agree with. But I love Viggo Mortensen, Sean Bean, Ian McKellen, Sean Astin, Merry and Pippin. I think are an incredible comedic duo.
Oh, really? So, I think they're always the kind of piece of and I think this is maybe pretty true. I feel that Merry and Pippin are probably polarizing characters. I feel that, and I think you and I are good evidence of this. I always find them kind of annoying with a couple of exceptions, and I think you obviously really like them as a comedic duo. I would be curious to see what people think in the comments of Mary. Like, am I on the wrong side of that, or
if I was gonna tier rank out the acting, I would put them in the middle. I think they do a really fine job. Obviously, they're not Sir Ian McKellen, who his eyes throughout even just this first movie are some of the most tantalizing acting I've ever seen. Just his little movements, he's perfected the just like we're being followed. You're like,
and again, it's not really fair either because he's such actually Christopher Lee wanted the role of Gandalf.
Yep. And he got the blessing from Tolkien to do it.
Oh my God. It's just but it's not really fair though, because I also love Ian McKellen's voice. Like, he just plays the kind of grandfatherly wizard so perfectly, and some of that just has to do with how he talks. It's just how he does the voice of Gandalf that I have no qualms just accepting that he is a wizard in real life. It's
the Shakespearean background he has. 100%. It's the way he enunciates and projects. It just feels so much grander and bigger. It's very Patrick Stewart, how Patrick Stewart comes across that way with a similar background.
Very much so.
I would say it was the right call, despite Christopher Lee getting the blessing to be Gandalf. I think he actually may be the one person I think embodies their character better than Sir Ian McKellen, because Christopher Lee is so Saruman. It is...
Oh my God.
Yeah, he's so good at just being that, like, fallen wizard evil. Like, oh, I love it.
Speaking of eye movements, okay, we got to do two things, and they tie into the same scene from the movie. One, eye movements from Christopher Lee when Gandalf realizes that he has fallen, and he just looks at all the doors and they close. If we want to be nitpicky about things that are maybe not the best in the movie, I always enjoy the wizard fight scene, but it is so hysterical to me sometimes if I take myself out of it to watch two older men having a fight, like an invisible fight with sticks and throwing each other across the room. And actually, one little additional point on that, if we're going to be critical of the movie, which is the fight scenes in the movie are pretty jumpy. There's some, and so Helm's Deep, I think, is an obvious exception to that, but that doesn't come until the second movie. And so when I was watching this movie and we see the fighting that's going on, there's very few scenes where it's actually continuous. It's a lot of sort of jumping so that you don't get to see a lot of the action. And we get a lot better sort of choreography. In that era, you have Phantom Menace that came out a couple years earlier, which does fantastic fight scenes, and you and Matrix as well. You want to labor on the storytelling overall, but there's plenty of action that happens in the movies, and I think that could have been done a little bit better.
I actually disagree. So for me, if you made it more Phantom Menace only works for me because they're sci-fi space wizards who are doing all this intense on-the-screen magic. But if you actually slow down and watch how they fight, it very often makes no sense whatsoever. Like Darth Maul just moving in a way where it's like, okay, you should have died, and you're totally exposed for like 30 seconds there, and just no one did anything. Right. And so I like that a lot of the fighting is really people taking prop swords and slashing at each other, which limits them because they don't want to be doing too crazy stuff because people get hurt, as notoriously everyone already knows Viggo Mortensen almost did with the knife.
The dagger.
Yeah. We won't even get into that. We
know. It's going to come in the comments. Did you know that he broke his toe? Did you know that
although I will say Lurtz also just accepts death for some reason. Like, Aragorn stabs him, and he could just start punching Aragorn or doing anything, but instead he just grabs the blade.
Sword into him?
And I was like, oh, so you just want to die? And then Aragorn beheads him, and I'm like, why? Elbows,
like,
man.
Have you
seen The Raid Redemption? Elbows are fucking great. Have you seen Raid Redemption, by the way?
No.
Okay, Ben, this is a big ask. I need you to do this. I need you to take the showdown fight from the end of The Raid Redemption with the two main characters versus the Mad Dog bad guy, and somehow edit Lord of the Rings to instead have that style of fighting, Ben, the editor. Go. All right.
I think that's a media mask at most. There are clearly, as we've discussed, plenty of things to be critical about the series and about Fellowship of the Ring, even though we love it, even though I think we're probably safe to say, maybe prematurely, that it deserves to stay on the list. But do you want to talk about, I want you to say what you were going to say, but do you want to talk about maybe the things that Lord of the Rings does well, too?
Yes, but I want to talk about one more thing that's probably the most controversial thing you could get into with Lord of the Rings right now. So this is something I'm going to give the olive branch of all olive branches for. I personally would not be bothered at all if there were more people of color cast in the original Lord of the Rings trilogy. The fact that only orcs were cast as people of color bothers me a little bit. I get there are people who say that would take them out of it. It's supposed to be European. Sure. I do not want to get into that. And just please respect the fact that would not necessarily bother me. I have actor friends who are people of color, and I'd love to see them represented. But it is something that, like, going to rewatch the movie now, it sticks out more and more as time goes on, especially Definitely. The fact that they did hire some, and they made them orcs.
Is like a little bit questionable, and especially within the past few years, it's basically since I'm sure that this has been done before Hamilton, but I think that Hamilton gets a lot of credit for sort of popularizing it on the mainstream, of basically being like, the color of the actor is less important than the quality of the performance and the story itself. It should not take you out of, it really should not take you out of the moment or the story, as if the actor is doing a good job.
I've
And so I
always
think
said best performance gets the role. I do not care about much else. You could even gender bend some of them. I would not care as if it's the
yeah.
best performance that's going to keep me in the movie. I'm in.
Yeah, and we're starting to see that more and more in TV shows these days, in movies, in plays. So it is a little bit when you watch something that's not even that old, just 20 years old or so, and you have sort of like a 2022 lens over it, it is sort of hard to ignore that aspect of it.
Okay, but now let's get into the unbridled praise. And oh my God, we're millennials who grew up watching this, and it probably influenced us in many ways. Praises for Lord of the Rings. And for me, I think the most impressive thing about Fellowship is how long it is, how much ground it covers, how much information it conveys, and yet it still keeps an incredibly clipping pace.
Yes.
Like, you do not feel bored throughout the entire thing.
Oh my God, Daniel, I'm so glad that's the first point you brought up. I'm so glad. Peter Jackson uses the voiceover of Galadriel, who's played by Cate Blanchett, to basically cover like 2,000 years of history, and they do it in about 3 minutes and in a way that's not like, you're like, okay, I get it. And then they start and you have your opening Fellowship of the Ring and you see Frodo sitting and reading a book, and it is perfect. They get you through action, they get you through backstory, they get you through all this plot. And I think that voiceover sometimes gets flack, and Cate Blanchett, holy shit, her voice is so perfect to be doing that. It's so kind of otherworldly already. I can already assume that she's an elf or some kind of otherworldly being. And yes, the pace, I feel that for a movie that is just shy of 3 hours long, the non-extended edition, I'm never really taken out of it.
Never.
And actually in a way that I was when I read the book.
And I really like that narrative choice too. They could have weaved in all this information throughout the dialogue, but it's one of the few times where just telling and showing all this stuff in an info dump at the beginning actually is the just better choice.
Yes.
I think it sets everything up so much better. And if we had done like flashbacks throughout, I think it would have destroyed the pacing. If we had tried to just weave it into dialogue, it would have weighed everything down. And instead, Peter Jackson just took it and made this spectacular borderline short film at the beginning that just explains ages of history.
And it gets it out of the way, so on the off chance that maybe it doesn't pay off and doesn't work well, okay, well, it's 3 minutes that the audience has to sit through, and then it's another 3 hours of really well done filmmaking. So, in some ways it's a little bit of a risk, but I genuinely, I think that he knew what he was doing there, and I think it clearly paid off incredibly well.
And I want to get back to performances real quick because we did not talk about Bilbo. And while he is not in the full movie, the performance of Bilbo and the writing of him also, of being this kind of jaded old man who still has a mischievous edge to him, is so much fun. And I can't remember the name of the actor right now, which he recently passed actually, which is so sad.
Oh, did he? I didn't know that.
Yeah, but he is part of what gets you so into it, because he gets this little character arc through this first act of the movie where you see him getting ready to leave, saying his goodbyes, and then walking off. And in a story that's so tied to ages past and time passing, the fact that in the first act we're basically getting the conclusion of someone's life is really beautiful to me. I love that choice.
Even just, I want to use that as a springboard to talk about just the sound design of the movie. The scene where Bilbo is letting go of the ring, and you see that sort of close up of his hand just trying to drop it. Two things. One, when Gandalf, stands up and becomes really imposing and sort of uses his thaumaturgy or whatever to intimidate Bilbo. That is brilliant sound design right there, and brilliant voice acting by Ian McKellen. And then the moment when you hear the ring drop onto the floor in a way that, and all the other sound cuts out, and it drops with this kind of unnatural weight to it. So you already know it's a ring of power, but it just gives a little bit more a sense of gravity to how powerful this thing really is, that, gold ring should not make that sort of dense thud when it hits the floor.
Absolutely. And I think that's because Peter Jackson, he has not shown this too much later in his career, but at least for this movie, he displayed a mastery of weight. And I don't mean that physically, I mean that narratively.
Mm-hmm.
He knows exactly how to set up importance and build tension and suspense. I think comparing it to, the ring dropping is a wonderful example, but also the setup for the Balrog showdown, where they have this initial showdown where they feel like they're desperate, but they get through it. They have this intense chase scene where it feels like they're going to be overwhelmed. And then that literal army that corners them runs.
Yeah.
And that's how you know what's coming is bad. And then there's that sound design and the song, and there's just boom, boom, boom.
Yes.
And Balrog. And he took some creative liberties there. It's not 100% accurate to what's in the book, but I think it was the right call.
Yeah.
Having this almost... I, in my head, compare it to the appearance of the T-Rex in Jurassic Park.
Definitely.
Where it's just this beast, and it's bigger than you. It's from almost another world, and just its presence. I mean, that can apply to a dinosaur and to a Balrog.
Sure.
And the way to deal with it is, we need to take our
It's just to
literal
run.
angel. Our angel's going to die because this is that big a deal.
Yeah, but it wouldn't have the same. I mean, actually, speaking of dinosaurs, you could say the same thing about velociraptors, right? Which in Jurassic Park are like gigantic, but in reality are sadly, like a foot or two tall. Peter Jackson's favorite movie growing up was King Kong. And so I think when you're talking about the design of, say, monsters like the Balrog or the cave troll, or Uruk-hai, whatever you sort of want to reference in the movies, I think that there's a lot of influence from movies like King Kong for Peter Jackson of like, how do we create something? How do we build something that is scary? How do we design suspense around it so that the audience is scared, and so you have scenes where an entire army runs away because they're all terrified of this thing that's coming around the corner.
Yeah. And I enjoy that. It just feels like a movie where we're kind of coming to the end here, but it feels like every single point just came together, and they were also smart enough, the studio was, to let them film all at once and give them a tremendous amount of pre-production, which paid off.
Definitely.
And post-production. If everything that still went right, but you lost the pre and post that these trilogy got, I think these would be half as good as they were.
Yeah.
Because the meticulous editing and touch-ups and the just care that was taken for each beat is a result of that, and how good the sets looked, how good the props worked, how well you could then make it all tie together. And I really am disappointed when I see a lot of shows and movies do not get the same amount of post-production. And that's why, and I will make a whole dissertation on this if people disagree. I think that's why we haven't seen a lot of movies step up to that level. I think there are movies that have been filmed that would be as captivating as Fellowship, but they are rushed. They're gotten out there as quickly as they can to get that money.
Right.
And because of that, they just cannot live up to this legacy.
Yeah. Clearly, there's a huge jump in CGI for Lord of the Rings and then for movies going forward. But also, one of the things that makes Lord of the Rings, I think, stick out and do so well in talking about post-production and pre-production is the amount of practical effects that are put into it too. You don't feel, people are really good at recognizing patterns, and sort of they're much better than they think they are at noticing when something seems off, even if they can't put their finger on it. And for me anyways, knowing that the films involve a lot of practical effects and visual illusions when it comes to the size of characters, I don't see it. And there's a tremendous amount of care and detail that is put into making sure that all of the sets are designed in such a way that people are looking at the right place, because they're often not sitting right in front of each other. They're sitting on different sides of the table.
The fact that we've talked this long about Lord of the Rings and we haven't talked about maybe the most impressive visual effect just goes to show how much there is to talk about with Lord of the Rings.
Yes.
Maybe actually the best performance, maybe actually the most technically impressive thing, maybe actually the greatest part of this movie is a visual effect that was so far ahead of its time that it just blew people away. It's the first full CG creature that just is interacting with people and has someone mocapping it, and it's brilliant. We don't have time to get into that because we're going way late, and I love our editor, Ben, so we have to come to a conclusion. So Noah, I have to ask you, would you remake Lord of the Rings today? It's the hardest one yet by far.
Here's what I'll say. I want to say no because there is so much reliance on that soft lighting and an overabundance of CGI just because it's cheaper now and it is more effective, but it's still, you look at it and you realize that it's CGI.
Yeah.
And it's weird. It's awkward. And I think that one of the things that makes this movie stand out is there is, as we've talked about, a real weight to it. I really as epics go, I really feel that they are moving across hundreds of miles. I really feel that these characters are 3 feet tall and 6 feet tall. Everything about it just seems so real. I'm so sort of able and willing to believe what's in front of me. And I don't want to see it done in a way that is going to be less fully realized than what we have right now.
Completely agree. I find this to be an amalgamation of perfect circumstances. There are criticisms to be had, but they are infinitesimal compared to what could be the problems if this was handled in any other way. So I 100% agree. Of course, I think this should stay in the AFI Top 100. It's my second favorite movie ever made. So yeah, for me, stays in there. It is my number 2 solidly.
Not only do I care a lot about it as a person, but I think that it truly does deserve to be on the list. And I totally agree with you. And I'm returning to something that we talked about all the way at the beginning. But when Return of the King wins all those Oscars, I really kind of feel that it is sort of a placeholder for all of the Lord of the Rings. And I think that it was awarded those because is Return of the King the best of all the movies? Not necessarily, but just sort of the scope of what Peter Jackson was able to accomplish and the fact that they came out sort of year after year. I think that it was kind of just sort of, they were waiting to be able to hand out those awards.
But okay, this has been our latest AFI Challenge deep dive, The Lord of the Rings, number 50 on the list. Criminally low in my opinion. Noah, any last thoughts?
None. Shockingly. No.
All right. Well, in that case, like and subscribe if you have not already. Check out my main channel if you have not. You can follow Noah nowhere, really, except for his Instagram, because this is his first dabbling into being a content creator. No, you're a content creator now. You can tell that to people.
That's wild. I'm an influencer. Hey, go buy chocolate.
Have a good one, y'all. Bye. I'm really excited to see what Ben's going to do with the raid fight scene in Lord of the Rings. I have no idea. And honestly, if it's too much of an ass, just don't do it. I think that's very acceptable. I understand.